Boys, we are back. Second Nature. Steve Holmberg, our probably most frequent returning guest co-host here on the platform. Steve, good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you, Dylan. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Aaron Lutzi, we've got Steve back for a very delayed emergency podcast emerging from TRE. We sent Steve a message saying, hey, you got to come on. We got to hear all about it. We had massive FOMO. Steve, it sounds like you've been on vacation for the last few days in
Yeah, I
the
literally
wake of TRE.
flew back from Austin, landed, and 2 hours later flew down to Palm Springs with the family for a couple days just to get away, which is good.
Nicely done. Probably required after being in a trade show zone for like days on end. I can only imagine that's the only way to recover from it.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking the amount of time that you spend inside of four walls in a beautiful location.
Yeah.
It was nice to sort of spend some time at the pool and hanging out with the family.
Heck yeah. And I'm sure you spent a lot of time meditating on what you witnessed there at TRE. And that's sort of what we want to uncover here on the podcast. I did not attend TRE this year. I was on the fence, decided not to go just based on the fact that I felt like I needed a little space to recover at home before the holidays. But holy smokes, the internet was just inundated with all my friends convening in one place. So I had massive FOMO, but I want to hear all about it because I think top line, the reaction coming out of it was just massively positive. So maybe before we get to that, I'd love to hear from you, Steve, as to why you went. I think this was your first time. So why'd you go to TRE?
Yeah, that was my first time. So there were a couple different reasons why I went. One, starting my business, it's an important opportunity to be able to see the people that I know in the industry and just have a presence there. And it was great to make a bunch of different connections with people I've sort of been emailing with, etc., and finally sit down and chat with them in person. The next part is really just sort of checking out the brands, see where the energy is being built, where the brands are going, where the consumer's going, and so really spent some time sort of cruising the floor and seeing what was new for next year.
Steve, just to make sure that our listeners know, your business is called Insight Accelerator.
That's
correct?
true. Yes, and I do consumer research as well as some strategy and some corporate trainings on how to perform research, which is fun.
We got to let the people know, man. We got to make sure.
Thanks. I appreciate the plug.
Heck yeah. Okay. So what were your goals at TRE? Like you went down to check what was happening with the brands, to interface with some new people. Did you have any like specific deliverables that you were hoping to return home with, kind of thing?
I wanted to get a sense if this was what the scene was like. Is this valuable to go to? Is this something that more people should be headed to? Are brands sort of there willing to talk to different people and gain exposure to different insights and ideas? And I think the answer is yes. There was a huge amount of energy at TRE. Like I felt it last year. I had FOMO last year because there was such good energy that was coming out in social media that I was like, if there's one place I go next year, it should be TRE. And it was totally worth it for me. I would do it again in a second. If they were holding it next week, I'd go back down. It wasn't long enough. I wish I actually got an extra day there to see more. I didn't get through everything I want to do.
I've heard that from a lot of different people. And TRE, the running event, maybe the best SEO titled event in history, right?
Yeah.
I think someone said that in our Slack channel. But the question I have too is who is it for? Who is TRE for? Who goes to this event?
So the sharp point really is brands are the ones representing, and they are basically selling in product to specialty. So think of Fleet Feet or your local running store. They are there and they are basically meeting with the different brands in order to figure out what their buy is going to be on their walls for the next year. And so it's a great time to showcase all of that product. But there's a ton of energy from all of the retailers on what they're going to pick and where the energy is and what they're hearing for consumers. And then there is also this additional media play that's there. So there are a number of people that are recording what are the next shoes that are coming out, what's the different shoes, what's the new line, et cetera. And so you had a good amount of media that was there.
It's important to actually note this because, Aaron, TRE is a B2B event. So when you go there, it's all industry people. right? So the brands are there to talk to people like Brendan Madigan or Ted Knutson, who own specialty running shops, and people from around the country who own shops like that come to actually place orders with brands. And from what I heard, like all the retail partners were really excited with the products that are coming down the line. Similarly, they're placing orders at the trade show. So all the brands are excited because they're actually receiving commitments of purchases from their retail partners. And then similarly, like Steve said, there's this media component to it. So people like me should typically be in attendance to not only network with brand people, but to see the products that are coming down the line, potentially develop advertising partnerships, and generally, like gear review type material performs really well on the internet, as we all know. So a lot of people are there just creating content. But it's important to note that it's a B2B industry facing show, as opposed to, for example, the Run Show, which happens in Boston early in 2025. It's actually owned by our partners in TrailCon, Doug Emsley and Raccoon Media Group. That's a consumer facing show. So anyway, I just wanted to level set that for the audience in case they were unfamiliar. Steve, I want to go straight to my biggest, at least the thing that I've heard the most coming out of TRE, and that is that Satisfy stole the show. They revealed the Rocker, their first footwear product. Tell me all about it. I want to hear about the vibe. I know they had everything locked down. So tell me about Satisfy first.
No photos in the Satisfy booth then.
Yeah. So the interesting part is, yes, no photos in the Satisfy booth. When you look at the floor of TRE, most of the booths are open. Like brands want people to walk by, see the product, and sort of be invited in. They want this inviting environment to come sort of look at the wall, see what the new product is. And Satisfy took a very different approach. And they basically dropped a box in the middle of the floor, and you have this small entryway that you walk in, and you've got the footwear in the back, which was fun to see, and you've got sort of apparel on either side. And I think what happened is it's a big size booth, but once you get inside, it's kind of tight and intimate, that there are enough people moving through that it kind of created this like buzz and energy, and everybody wanted to like go inside and see. And it had this mystery that was fascinating to see. And what's also fun to see is that there was Satisfy on one side and Bandit was sort of on the other side. They kind of flanked this dualism, and then On was right next to that. So you kind of had this like epicenter of sport lifestyle, or this new edge to running that was kind of fun. And it was literally almost right in the center of the floor, which drove a lot of energy. Product looked good. It's amazing to see all of that come to life in a physical manifestation, because most of the stuff that I've seen has been online. And so once you see that brand coming together, it's really looking good. And I think that takes me to one of the bigger themes that I saw coming out of the TRE event, was that there's a lot of focus on performance, and we can get to that in a second. But then there was this new shift into this more lifestyle side of sport, and I won't say lifestyle, but it's a different edge to running. Let's call it that, where you had brands like Satisfy, you had Bandit there, you had Lulu there, you had Puma there was actually sort of played in that same mix. And so there was this new tone and feel that felt like it was present at TRE that, from what I hear, hasn't been there in the past, which I think is what sort of drove a lot of that energy for those brands.
And Satisfy very much represents the collision of running and lifestyle. Before we move off Satisfy, it was importantly announced during TRE that they are welcoming a new CEO to the company. So perhaps the brand with the most heat behind it, the most energy behind it right now, announced the arrival of a brand new leader to sort of take the reins from Brice Partouche, who is the founder and creative director and who has been acting as CEO. So sort of at least a symbolic advancement for the brand to bring in what seems like a very competent operator to help Satisfy achieve this next phase of growth. I have actually their LinkedIn announcement open, so I'll just read it quickly here, and then we can move to a different subject, or you guys can react. But it says, we're excited to welcome Antoine Auvenet as our new Chief Executive Officer. Antoine joined Satisfy effective immediately, stepping into the role alongside founder and creative director Brice Partouche to lead the next chapter of Satisfy's journey. So basically exactly what I just said. And it seems like he has 20 years of experience in luxury retail. And just for our listeners, Satisfy is actually based in Paris, France, but I know North America is their largest market. So really interesting. And I think also something Aaron and I have talked about on the podcast is, as a growing brand, when do you expand categories that you're creating products within? This is Satisfy after doing collabs with both Hoka and Crocs, making their own footwear. And we've talked previously on the podcast, Steve, I don't know if you met Jean-Marc Dejean while you were there. He is the new head of footwear at Satisfy, and he is truly one of the best, if not the best, footwear product people in trail running history. So they are assembling a team of assassins at Satisfy right now. And I literally everybody I've spoken to who is at TRE has just said Satisfy was head and shoulders above everybody else, just in terms of heat and attention and vibes.
Yeah, I would agree. It feels like um, one of the other major themes that I saw coming out of the show was all the brands came with something new. And I think there were a lot of brands that elevated themselves, and we can talk about those brands in a bit as well. But it felt like everybody was playing a bit of the same game, but Satisfy was playing a different game, and Bandit was playing a different game. And the other one I would add in there is Puma. Puma's another one that really surprised me, that they're playing a slightly different game. And I appreciate that. Like, I appreciate that it's diversifying away from just the same old, same old.
What was Bandit's vibe like? Because going back to our early episodes, we talked about Bandit almost on every episode on a very regular occasion here. I'm curious to hear. I actually had dinner with their founders there last year. Really interesting guys.
And I met the founder there, and we had a really great conversation about the brand and where they're going. It was a little bit different in terms of they did have sort of a smaller entry, but it felt more open and inviting. It wasn't the largest booth that was there, but it was enough to sort of make a presence, and I think have that connection to a change in running culture, where a lot of the booths that we saw were sort of very much focused on running. They were focused more on this idea of culture and moving everything forward, and so not necessarily falling in line and just trying to compete with everybody else that's out there, but actually taking everything into a new direction and looking towards the future, which was really good to see.
I love it. God, I'm so pissed I wasn't there. We recorded a podcast with Mel Strong, Steve, yesterday, which will come out after your episode comes out. But obviously she shared her admiration for you.
Mel's great.
One of the things she said that stuck with me is that, like, it's really hard to be both big and resonate with like a grassroots community when we were talking about Nike. So Satisfy and Bandit very much represent new brands that are capturing a new energy and resonating really deeply with the most core people within the running industry and community broadly. So maybe on the other end of the spectrum, what were the big brands doing in order to, capture a little bit of that relevance and, be part of the conversation at TRE?
Yeah, so the big brands were there in force, and when I say in force, they brought a significant number of people. They had really large booths. They had a lot of product out on display, and they were packed. If you think of the Brooks, you think of Hoka, even Adidas had a really like large sized booth. They were there to play, and you could tell it had that energy that was there, and what I saw across the bigger brands is a couple different things. One, they all felt kind of the same. They kind of felt like they were telling this super trainer shoe. So if you think of, like, there's the race day shoe, and then there's what's your everyday trainer, that's sort of the takedown of it. That's all day, every day. Everybody had that shoe, and to be, in my opinion, it all largely looked the same. There are some differences that are out there, but everybody's playing that game, and it's a good game to play. Like, it's a sharp point in terms of what the foam is, the carbon plates, the amount of time that you can actually train in it versus race in it. And so I'm impressed by that portion of it. But it did feel kind of similar. The ones that surprised me that kind of came to the table more so is I was actually pretty impressed by Mizuno. They have sort of upped their line pretty significantly. Diodora was there and actually upped their line pretty well. And so you saw a very crowded space. And if we go back to sort of the top of the episode, the whole point of this is for specialty retailers to be there and make their buys. I think they had a very hard decision making that buy because you saw a lot of shoes that looked very similar all in that same space. And mind you, I didn't have the opportunity to run in any of them, so I don't know what their rides are like. But from looking at them on the wall, it all looked kind of in the same zone, but all evolved, which is great.
I have kind of a macro question based on some of the bigger brands that you were talking about. We talk a lot on this podcast about this idea of the challenger brands, right? These brands that are kind of coming up to try to dethrone the Nikes and whatnot. Did you feel like when you were interacting or just seeing each one of these brands on display from either the challenger or established brands, did you feel that same kind of vibe between the two, the challenger brands really trying to, you know, dig into that market share, or did it feel like certain brands were just acting like established brands even though we consider them to be challenger brands? Was that visible? Did you feel that kind of vibe at all at the show?
Yeah, here's what I felt is the big brands were playing the big brand game, right? Like they're moving big people through them, they're moving big inventory, etc. But they played in some ways very much in their wheelhouse, where these smaller brands felt more unique. When I say everybody was kind of the same before, it's you kind of see the New Balance versus the Mizuno versus Diodora versus Brooks, etc. It all looked similar. Where it started to look different is when you got to those smaller niche brands. So you look at the Norda, you look at Normal, you look at again Satisfy, Bandit. They all had a different aesthetic, which I think is very appealing to everybody to bring some freshness to the marketplace. And I think that is what drove a lot of that energy in the show, is that they may not have had the biggest booze, but they had some really nice setups sort of intermixed with the bigger brands and was driving that connection.
It makes me want to ask before we get more of your observations, Steve. Maybe this will be a good thing to just throw around the horn here quickly. I mean, we talk about Satisfy, we talk about Bandit, Norda, Normal. These are like the cool upstart, up and coming brands. I mean, and especially Bandit and Satisfy just have so much energy behind them right now that it's hard to sustain, right? The cool factor, like it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily stay forever. It's a perishable phenomenon, I feel like. And especially like as we were just saying, the spectrum between disruptive brands and these big established incumbents, there's a journey that you go on between being a disruptor to a large incumbent, right? And it feels to me like in a few years, Satisfy might be traversing into sort of the middle ground there. And one of the things that at least I've heard about is that the middle is a very dangerous place. So obviously, these brands need to grow, they're chasing growth, but growth isn't always good, or it can come at the cost of the cool factor. So obviously, we don't have the answers here. We're not going to solve this, and Satisfy shouldn't be taking our consultation or advice, but I figure like that's maybe an interesting conversation for us to bat around.
Yeah, for sure. And you see it a lot, and I'll just bring up the recent success of Vans over the last couple of years. You saw this like big movement into a brand, and then a very rapid sort of exit out of a brand. And you don't want to end up being a short term trend. What you want to be is that sustainable brand in the long term. I think my take on it is for brands like that, it's really important to understand what you are as a brand, and that you are potentially not a product as a brand, but you are an ethos that allows you to continue to evolve and expand. And I think why Nike did well sort of back in the day is that they were about innovation. And so that innovation kind of, you can continually apply innovation and create movement and change in a marketplace, and stay fresh to consumers. Even if some products are sort of moving out, you are able to sort of maintain that innovative side of things. I would ask these brands, what are they? If they're not necessarily what they currently are. It's what are those elements that make them what they are. So is it pushing the edge? Is it disruptive innovation? Is it lifestyle meets performance? And is it the most premium product on the marketplace? And if you own that, you have the opportunity and leeway to continue to grow and build. Where if you are just sort of living in hey, I just make this style, you may sort of be washed out with that trend. That's what I would watch for them.
The other thing it makes me think about is this might be kind of weird, but company culture. And to talk about, the next pod we have with Mel, I was listening and doing some research on her and some of the other discussions she'd had, and she talked a lot about this moment at Nike where the goal of the company was to hit $50 billion in sales, and that became the goal. And they lost a lot of momentum in that process because that goal was so disconnected from the company culture, and it didn't fall in line with what Nike was really all about. Like, oh, now we're sort of about sales. And Steve, you could probably speak directly to that. But I
Oh,
wonder if when it comes to this idea of who are we as a company, what is our culture? You talk about Satisfy, and Dylan, the people you listed off, the guy coming from luxury goods and the greatest footwear designer on the planet for trail running, and like that is the company culture. Those are the people that work there, and that's the goal that they're after. When you get into that middle thing, you've already passed the goalpost of like, we're going to be innovative, we're going to stand up this company, and now what is the next thing that we're all aligned and chasing after? And I feel like company culture, when it comes to this discussion, is actually a lot more important, because that's, especially in a trade show environment, that's what comes through to the people that are interacting with your brand, right?
Yes. I'd love to add in there too that it's interesting to see that push to 50 billion. And again, we should do a different podcast on this to go through, but that was a clear demarcation in my priority seems to be shifting away from the consumer in order to sell and Wall Street. And that shift is a dangerous one to watch for. And I think if these smaller brands can stay focused on that consumer and that leading edge and connecting with them, that can be very successful. But once you start to try to answer investors or try to prove to investors and drive those sales in maybe ways they shouldn't be driven, that's where you start to lose contact with that consumer. And then you have a potential fallout as it goes through.
I'm so happy I lobbed this into the conversation here. Lutzi, I feel like that observation is potentially one of the most powerful we've ever had here on the podcast. That company culture ends up being felt by the consumer, the market, and, the media in the case of TRE in this industry facing show. I was going to use this as a BPC in a future episode, but I want to just build on our conversation here. I listened to a podcast with the CEO of Mischief. Have you guys heard of this company? They make those big red boots, those big goofy red boots that were viral.
Yeah.
Fascinating conversation. The thing that I think is relevant to what we're discussing now is he said something about how what they're trying to do with everything, all the products that they create, is to monopolize a feeling. So going to what Steve said, it's about the ethos, not necessarily about the product. Not a totally original thought that we're like batting around here, but I think it's a really interesting way to reframe it or to think about it, of like, really, instead of thinking about, how the consumer is going to use it, is like, what feeling are you trying to conjure in that individual when they put on your pair of shoes? A very interesting thing. And I think that starts, going back to Aaron's point, even at sort of the company culture level. But, in product creation, like, what a fascinating thing to keep in mind is like, what do I want this person to feel emotionally when they're using this product?
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's great.
yeah. All right. Well, moving along here, one of the things that you mentioned also, Steve, is that brands are focused, it seemed, either on footwear or apparel. Is there anything interesting there? Anything you want to build on?
Yeah, so it was when the brand showed up, it really seemed like there were footwear brands and there were apparel brands, but there wasn't a lot of cross of the two, and some of that may have been behind closed doors that we didn't necessarily see, but you didn't see those big brands coming with sort of the apparel lines that I would have expected. And I believe footwear brands should be focused on making the best footwear possible. But there is that opportunity to continue that innovative aesthetic that they have and bringing that into that apparel side of things. And I think that has largely left the door open for brands like Bandit and Lulu being there and Viore, etc., to kind of maybe fill some of that space because the other brands are not represented. And so it's more of a kind of a surprise to me. I expected to see more of it. Even so, Nike showed up for a first time in a long time into the show, and their booth that they had on the floor was all footwear. Really didn't see apparel on that side. But so that was one of the surprises that I had.
It seemed like Nike did they took the show very seriously as
Yes.
in their return to retail. That's probably an important thing for us to cover here, given your experience working at the brand.
Yeah, it's good to see them come back and have a presence there and show that specialty is important. Everybody that was there was talking about that importance of specialty being the sharp point to consumers, being the place that consumers go for a recommendation and almost a prescription for their footwear. It is a validator for many people within the industry, and so having Nike have a good, strong presence there was really nice to see.
I think what's interesting is you said it's extending to trail. So obviously I'm a trail person. Much of our audience is focused on trail running more so than road running. So I'd love to get your observation on that. But you also said that there wasn't as much as it relates to like gym and fitness and stuff. And typically there is a little bit more of a crossover there.
Yeah. So that was one of those key parts to pull apart, is that trail was having a moment, and that makes sense in many ways. We talk about the energy in I know I'm with you. We talk about the energy in the industry, and everybody's feeling this that the pie is growing. That being said, when you look at road running, participation isn't growing. Like, it's growing at like a low single digit number. And so the growth that we're seeing on that road running side is coming from others that are probably not running, or there's dynamics that are happening with ASP, average selling price, that are sort of creating this inflated revenue, where when you actually look at trail, it's growing in the mid-teens, low to mid-teens, and there's that energy there, and it's finally, I think, sort of receiving the attention that it deserves within the industry. And so it was great to see them taking a lot of that performance attributes, similar to what Speed Limit has been doing for a while now, right? Like, they've been pulling some of those best parts of road running and putting it into a trail shoe. You're seeing more brands do that now. So I saw more deconstructed footwear than I possibly could imagine, all with plates in it, all with different foams, new traction systems. Like, there was a lot of energy that was there. At the same time, there's always this strong connection between running footwear and sort of gym. And so if you think about it, all the people that buy running footwear, oftentimes they're wearing it in the gym as well. And you see it. If you go to any gym, people are wearing more running footwear probably than training footwear. And so you'd expect to see a little bit of it, especially with the advent of High Rocks, which is, for those that are not familiar, it is basically a high intensity race is the best way I can sort of describe it, where there's running component, there's a kettlebell component, there's a sled pushes, etc. And so there's this combination of strength and running and endurance, and it's become very popular, especially in Europe, and you're seeing it more sort of over here. And I was expecting to see a little bit more connection to that. Tier has done a nice job. They put a carbon plate within their training footwear in order to sort of help increase overhead presses, etc. But the story wasn't there as much as I was expecting with the popularity of High Rocks.
That's one of those things where I'd get a little bit I don't know, weary of Tier? Really? Tier? The swimsuit company is making carbon plated shoes that people wear to the gym? I don't know. It's an interesting strategy. And yeah, obviously, if you're successful in one category, might as well take a swing at elsewhere. But the fact that they were exhibiting at TRE feels like a little strange to me.
Yeah,
no shade, obviously. No shade.
No shade.
Yeah.
You want to know another one?
Yes.
Skechers came with performance footwear that and they were sort of right next to each other. They were pretty similar zones. And it was really surprising to see them come to the table with that. And Dylan, I think, it's a good observation, because when you start to see brands that you wouldn't expect to do it, like maybe it's a sign that like people are ready for something new, right? Like when everybody starts flooding the same space, that's the time to start to look in a different direction, and go somewhere else. And so just one to watch.
If you had to break down TRE and assess what's missing, what would you want to see different at TRE, or what would you want to see added other than an appearance by your favorite Second Nature hosts? But like, what is TRE still missing after all these years, in your
Yeah.
opinion?
I think I'd say two things, and I'm going to try to remember both. But the first, and it goes back to you guys actually, is, I think it does a good job connecting retailers to brands, but I think this has the opportunity to be a much bigger media story. And it feels like at the moment that it's almost downplayed, where they have this sort of little area that people are interviewed. They're sort of off in the corners, and sort of away from everything. It feels like there's this opportunity with as much as everybody's pushing YouTube, as much as everybody's pushing podcasts, etc., to really create a space where creators are able to see everything, share everything, give their opinions, and have that almost be the show that's then surrounded by everything else that's going on. And I think that would really help do two things. One, I think it would build the energy of TRE, of even more so getting it out to more people, which would drive more people in. But I think it would also lay some additional energy on the floor of just people moving through and what's happening, and all of these exciting elements. And I think they've tried. I just don't think they're there yet, as that next connection. And
I
so,
mean,
yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say Free Trail was a pioneer. Last year we did our trail gating, which we typically do as our race coverage at different events, and brought a B2B angle to it from Free Trail's perspective. We set up a whole studio in our hotel suite and invited people up from the brands, and had a lot of fun making that content. But again, I was feeling a little bit too burnt out to try and copy paste that this year.
Yeah,
but
that's hard.
yeah.
And my that's where I think TRE could help with that, right? Like, could they set up like four different sort of studios that you basically just borrow, and you're like, we've got all our equipment, you set it up, boom, you do an interview, you're on the floor, you see the energy behind you, and then you're out. So you don't have to have your hotel room, you don't have to try to pull people off the floor in order to make that happen. You could kind of create these interesting booths that then people could watch, because everybody wants to see those athletes, and those people. So that's one. The second one is, I do think there's the opportunity. This has gained so much energy that it feels like OR did, so Outdoor Retailer, 15 years ago, where it could be more than just retailers talking to brands. It could be people, it could be a bigger media play. It could be consultants like myself. It could be a lot of different functions getting together and sort of sharing this opportunity. And you're seeing brands bring not just salespeople, you're seeing them bring the CEOs. I met with a number of my colleagues from consumer research. They all had people there. Strategy folks were there. It could be more of this industry get together than sort of just the sole focus of the smaller brands. Yeah.
Yeah, then they'd be stepping on TrailCon's toes, though. So,
I mean, maybe
cease
that's
and desist.
and maybe that's the opportunity, right? Like,
Yeah, no.
to blow it up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so cool. All right, so I got to bring our favorite second naturalists into the conversation here. You said you got to meet Matt Sharkey and Matt Trappy in person finally on the show floor. And Matt Trappy's summary of the experience was also very good. We'll make sure to link to it in the show notes in his newsletter, A Matter of Brand. And I actually shared it in our newsletter today for Free Trail. And I pulled one of the quotes from it that I thought was interesting and something that maybe you guys will have a reaction to. So the quote is, "I saw an industry that is oddly enough experiencing both growth and disruption simultaneously. Typically, industries invite disruption by becoming stale and stagnant. Not this time. Running is going nuclear." Pretty interesting dynamic there. Lucy, any thoughts?
I love Matt's takes on all this stuff, and it's so fascinating to see that, because now there is a bit of a level playing field with the ability to, create something and build something from scratch. I think one of the newer brands that appeared that we haven't talked about, Raid was there. They're just kind of getting up and running. There's another brand called Tantrums that was there that looked really cool. Like I saw a bunch of photos from that booth that was like made to look like your 1990s, room with all the band posters and stuff on the wall. Like interesting that the disruption can come from anywhere at this point, that it doesn't have to be an established brand coming in and doing something new. It can be someone who's just focusing in on this one thing and really bringing it in and adding, growth, top line, everything, but also just delivering something new. And I think that's really the fun part to watch through all this, that now that there is the ability to challenge the incumbents, you can start from any corner of the running industry and develop something new.
Steve, comments?
Uh,
Disruption versus stability?
what I appreciate, I agree. I think there is both stability and disruption happening at the same time, but I think the at the end of the day, the consumer wins in this situation because the big brands are forced to evolve to meet what the niche edge is pushing. And as those bigger brands kind of move into that space, then those niche brands continue to push or find new areas to move into, which is really exciting. And I think that's the sign to me of a healthy industry. That is something that this is not just a flash in the pan, that this is something that will continue for several years of hopefully strong momentum, that we'll see moving forward. And so I think that's where the encouragement and a lot of that energy came from, is that many of the brands elevated, they told that same story. And then there's these brands that were pushing the edge that was just highlighting the scale and scope of what running can be and where it can go.
I think the disruption discussion is really interesting too. And one of the points that you made before we started recording, you were talking about what it might look like for athletes to be delivering and developing new products. You think that's what we're going to see next year at TRE?
Not next year. So this is one of the topics that I ended up chatting with Matt and Matt about, Sharky and Trappy, is I think there's an interesting dynamic that's happening at the moment. Can I rewind for a hot second to go like through some of the history of some of the disruption that we've seen between athletes and brands?
Please, please.
Send it.
So let's go, if we go back in time, the when I was growing up, the way I was able to see an athlete was largely through a brand. And brands were the ones that had a large media spend that could put an advertisement on TV, or they could put a billboard up, or they could put print in magazines. And that's the way we connected with athletes. Along comes social media, and that completely disrupts what that experience is. And so athletes were able to post themselves on social media, and consumers were able to connect directly to them. And that created a lot of disruption for these bigger brands because no longer were they needed to have that connection. And brands kind of struggled on the marketing side to figure out how they plugged in and how they made that connection now that they didn't have to be there. And so that's continued over time. And now many of these athletes have a bigger following than the brands that sponsor them, and they have there's a lot of money that's wrapped up in a number of these different athletes as well. I think we're on the edge of the next disruption, and in coming out of Trappy's, yet again, maybe we can link this post as well, where in an interview with a sports marketing person and an agent trying to help their athlete sort of receive the compensation that they were looking for. And I think when I look at what's going to happen next, I think these athletes are going to move from just being a brand, and they're going to start to create product, and they're going to use the power of the brand that they have as an authentic athlete to bring something new and unique that is part of who they are to marketplace. And that is going to completely disrupt the big brands. And I really feel strongly the big brands need to be watching for this very closely, because we're seeing small signs of that. And while not an athlete, you see what's happened with Skims and the popularity that's there. They have the authenticity, they have the money. They just need to figure out how to create the product. And once they can create that product and bring it to market, I think it's going to be incredibly powerful, because it's never been easier to create that product and bring it to market themselves. And especially as the consumers become trained on niches, they love these very these small spaces. If you're in the know, you're in the know. And since they've been trained in that space and they're no longer on that big brand focus, they're looking for those unique small elements. And I think athletes can serve that for them. And you've seen there's a volleyball brand that's come out by ex-volleyball athletes. You've got a fencing shoe that's come out from an Olympic medalist. And there's a lot of these brands that are, you have Sage from Allison Felix coming to market. You're going to see a flood of that coming. I don't think next year, but I think you give it 2 to 3 years. Once it starts to catch on, it's going to catch fire, and brands are going to be kind of lost if they're not the ones that are helping this happen.
Watch this space.
I have so many thoughts. Can
Tell
I go
me,
next, Aaron?
what do you think? Go.
Yeah.
What do you
Okay.
think?
Go for it.
All right. Well, so, not breaking any news here, but I'm in the process of trying to do this myself,
Exactly.
And Lucy with our secret project is kind of the same, right? So
That's exactly it.
like what you're saying, Steve, is abundantly true. The power dynamic has shifted in favor of the athlete and creator like it never has in the history of time. One thing we've talked about on the podcast here in the past was On's partnership with Zendaya. So Zendaya, not a professional athlete, but unequivocally one of the most famous people in the world, even though I literally have no idea what she does because I'm a boomer. But, in the future, is it like Zendaya actually launches her own shoe rather than taking some huge check from On? The obvious trade-off there is that if you're going to launch your own product, yes, you own it and therefore have much bigger upside, but you're responsible for the operation of creating and distributing that product. Killian Jornet is the best example from TRE, being a co-founder and co-owner of Normal. And he is, of course, bigger than the sport of trail running. He's one of, if not the only people who'd be able to do that at a significant scale within our sport. Maybe Courtney Dauwalter is another, potential person who would have that type of clout. But I also, as I've been evaluating Freetrail's ability to create and sell our own products, I have been trying to learn as much as I can about it. And I actually listened to a podcast kind of in this vein. And what the individual said on this show was, when you add complexity on top of complexity, it creates a shit show. So, for example, owning and operating a small time media business, which I already do, is a lot of freaking work. If I were to then try and stand up a product operation, which requires sourcing and developing relationships with the manufacturers, making a good product, for God's sake, getting all the photo shoot done, getting it online, having somebody ship it, deal with customer service, it's a lot of complexity. But if you can develop or figure out your operation, holy smokes, that's how we would turn Freetrail into sort of a rinky-dink, though successful, profitable media business into something that was actually bigger.
What I think is really interesting is I think you can draw a corollary between athletes that are doing content well and athletes that are not doing content well. And that is, if we had a 3-tiered system, right? There's competition as tier 1, competition or being an athlete in general plus content is tier 2, and then tier 3, you have to do the content thing in between to get to the point where selling a product actually has the momentum that you need behind it. So you have to make it up this ladder to be able to be successful in it. But if you can do 2, you can probably do 3. But there is a lot that you have to learn to go from being an athlete to being an athlete content creator, just as there's going to be a lot to learn and there's going to be a lot of stuff to figure out. That being said, if you're able to figure out what's on tier 3, you then become even more valuable to the brands that you're already working with, because you can share your best practices with those other brands. You can have way more credible discussions with them. And I think one of the better examples in the world of mountain biking is Cameron Zink. And what I think is important about Zink specifically, he did just launch a bike line this year, but for the last decade, he's had a brand called Census Grips. Now, grips are probably the cheapest and easiest part on the bike to replace and to create, but that's okay. Like, you don't have to make a running shoe as your first product. It could be some kind of like pair of running shorts. It could be, a headband, whatever. It doesn't need to be the craziest thing. At this point for athletes, it's going to be more about getting reps and figuring out, how do I get from point A to point B? And I think there's another thing when it comes to being a successful athlete content creator. The best ones have figured out how to get people on a team to help them go. And I think the people that are able to build the right team to help them get there are going to be the people that are successful the fastest. But there are going to be easier ways to get there, and people are going to figure this out. But like Steve said, it's not going to be next year. It's going to be a couple of years from now. But this is going to be a fun trend to watch as people start to uncover that stuff. And I think in a future episode, we've sort of had a pretty big unlock in our secret project and someone who could take it from this idea to execution. And that might be a really big lever for a lot of the athletes that are trying to figure out, I've got the idea, but now what? That gap is going to have to close over the next couple of years for this to come true.
So maybe the lesson from Cameron Zink to bring it to running is to identify and target a product that is not necessarily requiring you to go create a carbon plated advanced technical piece of footwear, right? So like, what are those categories? Could you make hats and socks and running sleeves, the type of thing where you don't have to have large sizing stratification and things that are maybe a little bit easier to manufacture, more consumable? So like, could Jim Walmsley start a hat brand? That's kind of an interesting thought experiment.
Nutrition, recovery, there's like a lot that's in there. I think there's a business opportunity too. I don't know if you boys are in, but what there could be is this Stealthworks company that's behind the scenes that does the design and with all of the athletes' approval, but the design, the marketing, the production, the distribution. And it's not about that brand, right? Like, it's a stealth brand, but it's the one that facilitates it for that athlete, which could be an interesting one. So Dylan, to your point, it takes it off your plate, and obviously takes a good cut, but the sort of answers that for these athletes in the meantime, while it all sort of gets figured out. I don't know.
That was
a good opportunity.
That was a galaxy brain on a previous podcast. It's like, could you start an agency with people with product experience? Go to Jim Walmsley, Courtney DeWalter, Cameron Zink, any other, professional athlete who has the audience of, a transcendent, singular type generational, reputation within their sport and a big audience, and then help those athletes create products in different categories.
Yeah, let's do it.
Galaxy Brain Inc. That's what we'll call the agency.
Let's go.
Nice.
All right. Anything else before we go to BPC, boys?
Can I just add one more thing? I think
Please.
my last and biggest takeaway that I think I had at TRE was, to me, running has never felt more accessible and less accessible at the same time. I think what I truly felt there is that it felt like there was more diversity, more connection to different types of people. It's younger. There's this strong energy that's being built around running that isn't just pale and male. And I think that's great. And you look at the footwear, and it's bringing in older consumers, which is great because this softer cushioning allows you to go longer distances. You've got all of this spectrum that's sort of really inviting, but at the same time, the prices have gotten really expensive. And in doing so, there is potentially a barrier that is created to people entering the sport. If I don't look a certain way, or I can't afford a certain brand, then I don't know if I can be a runner. And they may run, but maybe it loses that identity as a runner. And so I think we're at this really interesting transitional time within running of sort of acceptance, but also sort of separation that's occurring with especially the prices of the products that are out there at the moment. They are kind of becoming exorbitantly expensive, and for good reason. There's a lot of innovation in there, which is great, but that may create a barrier for people. So it's just an interesting one I'm watching in the future.
I like the observation, and it is a good segue to my BPC, so maybe I'll get us started. But
Go for
before
it.
I do, maybe that's another Galaxy Brain opportunity. Remember last time you were on the show, we talked about Rivendell,
Yeah.
who, is explicitly the anti-brand in cycling when everything's going high-end, technical, aero. They're all about the experience and simplicity of the act of cycling. So maybe that's the opportunity in running right now when everything's getting more expensive. Why not simplify and create something that's a little bit more entry level? What
Yeah.
is not entry level is going to be my BPC today. Sometimes we use this as an opportunity to talk our own book, to pump our own bags, so to speak. So I'm going to be doing that. So that is my initial caveat here. My BPC today, boys. The new RX FPY from Speedland. Full disclosure, I am a partner in this business based in Portland, Oregon, where Aaron and Steve both reside. The reason I wanted to bring this up, obviously relevant to our conversation here today, this shoe won Best in Show from Gear Junkie at TRE last week. This is Speedland's first foray into the road running market, so a trail first brand making a road shoe. And as is the case, it has innovation, which is core to Speedland's DNA. So it's the first road super shoe with a BOA fit system. I actually was on a panel at UTMB last year with the people from BOA, and one of the questions that we got is like, why haven't we seen BOA product on road shoes yet? And my response was, the first person who does it is going to make a shitload of money. So I hope that's the case here for my buddies at Speedland. And also it's Aaron and I, we just told you, Steve, we're patent pending on our secret project right now.
Congratulations.
Speedland's core IP is their removable carbon plate. So it's a super shoe where you can actually take the carbon plate out and put it back in. So you get two very different running experiences in one shoe. So really interesting innovation. And I'm super proud of the guys, Dave Dombrow, Kelvin Fallon. They're coming on the show here very soon to talk about building Speedland. But for our listeners, it's effectively a two-man company that is creating game-changing, innovation in a category that has existed for 100 years. Super stoked to be working with those guys. And this product is freaking dope. RX FPY from Speedland. That's my BPC. Sorry to talk my own book. Who wants to go next?
Steve, you want me to go, or you want to
go for it? Go for
All
it.
right.
No, I'll go last.
Well, I'll go a little bit further down the athlete rabbit hole. One thing that actually just happened a couple of weeks ago and just got released about a week ago. There is a new league in mountain biking called the Hard MTB League, and it is an athlete, Braden Bringhurst, who put together a new concept of mountain bike racing, and it basically is a multiple part course. There's a technical climb that's like crazy difficult, a downhill, with big drops, and then there's a really difficult rhythm section that you have to get through, and it's kind of best time of the three. And it challenges riders in a completely new way that's sort of multidisciplinary. You can't just be fast. You have to be technically good on the bike. You have to be fit to climb. You have to do all these different things. And it sounds a little bit like enduro racing, but what's cool about this is that the whole thing fits in like a spectator area, as opposed to like, all right, see you guys in 20 miles. It's all in one spot, so you can see the whole thing go down. And what I thought was really interesting is that instead of trying to just put on a whole series or to do a giant event, they actually did a thing called the test event, where they brought a ton of riders together and they documented everything. And they tried to use that test event exactly that way to figure out what was going to work and what wasn't going to work so that they can roll it out. But they essentially introduced the idea of like a new style of bike riding that challenges the best riders. Who's actually the best bike rider of all these different racers and riders? So I'm excited to keep an eye on this one. I heard about this when I was on my road trip earlier this summer, and yeah, I think it's promising.
Very cool. We should devote a whole episode to the emergence of new leagues. I listened to a podcast with the CEO of Overtime. Very interesting. Started as a media company in basketball, and now they have their own competition-based IP league that has, in some cases, replaced going to the NCAA for people who have professional aspirations in basketball. But anyway, there's a big trend there.
I think one of the ones that I was most interested in coming out of TRE is looking at Solomon, and they have what they're defining as a gravel shoe. And while gravel shoes are not new to the market, I did like the idea of how they're thinking about and positioning it, though, which is this idea of a road shoe with some basic characteristics of a trail running shoe that creates this interesting crossover. So it's not just like more cushioning, and it's not just a different element. It's like a really thoughtful approach to how they bring gravel to the market, which I think is very user friendly. While there's a lot of sharp points of people climbing mountains and running over ridges, etc., like the everyday person moving into trail is kind of on a single track, sort of a smooth single track, maybe a double track, and they just need that entry point in that feels like road, but has a little bit of that connection into it. And it kind of reminds me, I don't know if maybe we can link to this as well. There's a funny Instagram reel of this runner, or it's a road runner and a trail runner. Sort of they talk, and there's one of the road runners that is looking off into the trail, and they're like, I've heard it's amazing. I heard you can eat whatever you want. I heard time doesn't matter. And she's like, don't do it. You'll never come back. And I think it's these moments that are gateways that kind of pull people in from the outside. I think that was, to me, one of the things, while again, not terribly new, but I really like the approach to try to bring people into trail running and make it feel a little bit more accessible, instead of this sort of, it's either trail or it's road. It sort of had this nice in between, and it was well positioned there and felt a little different than what we've seen in the past. So that's the one I'd bring up.
The gateway shoe.
Yes.
That's a good idea, actually, Aaron. The gateway drug is a name of a trail product. I like that. Yeah. Oh, guys, man, we could go forever. This is just too much fun, but we got to settle in for Thanksgiving. This episode will come out. Well, I guess okay. So people will be listening to this, but ideally when they're doing their Black Friday shopping. But anyway, it's always fun to connect with you guys. Steve, thanks for sharing a little bit about the show with us. Aaron and I will definitely be there next year to mix and mingle and hang. We didn't even get to the happy hours and the social component of it, which I'm sure was a major highlight.
It's actually intense.
I got a text from my buddy David Lamb, who said something like, "I'm never drinking again." Or something oh no, it was I'm never drinking again, and I never want to hear the words supercritical foam or something like that. So.
PIVA, right?
PIVA, yeah. All right, cool. All right, boys. Well, happy Thanksgiving to you both. Thanks for coming on the show, Steve. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thanks again. Have a good one.